So welcome, friends, colleagues, and connections from around the world. Today, I'm really pleased to welcome Brigid O Donovan, who's the founder and managing partner of IoT Sensing, based in Lucerne in Switzerland. One of Brigid's many passions is sustainability. And I know Brigid's background is very much in technology. So I wanted to talk to her about what is sustainability, what are the key issues, and maybe what could small companies do to ensure that they actually meet sustainable objectives. Yeah. So maybe firstly, Brigid, maybe you could tell me why you're so passionate about sustainability.
Oh, thanks, Paul. Well, as you know, I grew up on a farm in Ireland that's been in my family for several generations. And two concepts were very influential on my own personal worldview. The first one is the concept of stewardship, that we are actually the guardians of what we inherit. And the other one is entrepreneurship, to protect and enhance what we pass on to the next generation. So this naturally led me to study engineering, because I firmly believe that technology is a key enabler of a sustainable future. And then, of course, I went on to study marketing and management, because we need to be able to run successful businesses using this technology. And I feel I've been very fortunate so far in my career to be able to work with both startups, family businesses, and multinationals who share my passion in making sustainable businesses that deliver long-term value for people, planet, and the organizations themselves.
Great. So what do you, I guess we should really talk about what is the definition of sustainability from maybe a technical organization perspective. I guess we can think about it in products, but is it wider? Is there a wider context?
Yeah. Sustainable development is defined as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And therefore, we need to balance the social, environmental, and economic factors to continuously monitor and learn and make good decisions for people, planet, and prosperity. And it isn't enough just to focus on any one of these three priorities. We need to have a balanced approach to all of them. And I think we've seen the social and environmental consequences of focusing too much on the economic factor. Yet it's very important to continue to focus on the economic factor, because if we don't have that, we won't have the funding available to provide education and healthcare systems and various other services that are actually basic human needs and should be basic human right for everybody on the planet. And then on an individual level, if we're not economically sustainable, we become a burden on society and on other people. So it becomes a balancing act of focusing on all three and knowing how to balance it and knowing when is enough on any of the three of them.
Yeah, I guess a lot of, for a long time, sustainability was often seen as, let's say, a bit left field. It was seen as not something that enabled profitability or revenue growth in companies. But I think over the last several years, I think that's clearly starting to change, yeah? One of my favorite companies in terms of the products they sell and their ethos is Patagonia, who sell outdoor clothing, many items of which I've owned for over 25 years and are still going strong, right? And if you ultimately tear them or damage them, you send them back and they will stitch them up and fix them for you and send them back. So that's a great example of an organization that's looking at how they don't reuse material and actually how they support the longevity of their products. Yeah, and I guess this folds into electronics and even software to some extent. There's the hidden cost of data centers, which is often hidden. Everyone thinks Google and so forth and Facebook is for free in terms of energy consumption. But ultimately, it's, I think I read 7% of the planet's energy production is currently used to actually power data centers around the world. Yeah, I know they plan to put these things under the oceans and on the ice packs, to try to get this for free. But at the moment, I think it's still very much a positive contributor to energy consumption and the pollution that henceforth comes from that kind of activity. Yeah. So I've also read recently that there's different kinds of sustainability, one of which is, I think, footprint, which I think is most people would be aware of. But I've also read about something called handprint. So maybe could you expand on that topic a little further?
Oh, sure. Okay. And might I come back to your example about sustainable development being profitable, and also your example of Patagonia?
Yeah,
Because
please do.
if you think Patagonia is part of the B Corp movement, I guess you're familiar with this. It's a certification by B Labs, and these companies balance purpose and profit, as you said, and they must fulfill the 5 criteria of their impact. So on governance, on their workers, the community, the environment, and also customers. And a stat that you might have read is that in 2018, the UK B Corp certified companies grew 28% faster than the UK average. Oh. So that's quite impressive.
Yeah.
And I mean, this becomes a virtuous cycle because more and more customers and employees are seeking out these B Corp companies because people want to contribute to something that's good. And it's good for business growth, and it's also very good for employee retention, happiness, and ultimately their productivity. And then we could also consider more specific examples which enable both cost savings and the generation of new revenue streams for companies. You mentioned earlier about the data centers, and building management systems can actually optimize energy and water usage. And interestingly enough, a lot of the water used for cooling data centers is then used to heat swimming pools and also buildings.
Yeah, okay.
So here where I live here, they're taking all the water that's been heated to actually use it to piping it along to heat the buildings in the city. So there's a lot of work going on there, and there are a lot of things. And then also one of my favorite examples is about food. Did you realize that 1/3 of all food that's produced is wasted, and food waste contributes 8% of greenhouse gas emissions? So managing this not only helps to reduce hunger, but it also, and protect the environment, but it also saves money, and then it enables new revenue streams for companies that are doing demand prediction services, waste management services, smart bins where you can analyze the food, and there are a lot of things like this. And then in precision agriculture also, people, not only are you optimizing water and nutrient usage, you can also use IoT systems and other methods to increase the yield and also increase the market value and your profit by determining exactly the best time to harvest the crop. So there are a lot of, it's a whole process, and there are a lot of things going on. But then you came and you asked me about footprint and the handprint, and I really like this. I think everyone is familiar with the footprint, which mainly focuses on the negative impact of people, organizations, and even countries on the environment and society. But I really like now that in recent years, people have added the concept of a handprint, which is our positive impact on these factors. And now there are quite a few tools to measure both your water footprint, your ecological footprint, and now more and more companies are also developing tools to help us measure our handprint as well. And the idea, of course, is to minimize our footprint and maximize our handprint so that we have the maximum net positive impact possible to have.
Yeah. So you mentioned a standard earlier. Are we seeing the kind of standardization of how sustainability is measured across companies? Or is this still somewhat fragmented at the moment in different regions, or just sort of glib statements?
Okay. So I guess you're aware of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which was adopted by all 193 UN member states in 2015. And at its heart, this is 17 Sustainable Development Goals covering all the most important issues. And these are made up of 169 individual targets within those and 232 indicators. And in general, this is an urgent call to all countries and all people to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030 and into the future. And these are very robust and very comprehensive. And in fact, it's the most widely accepted language, I would say, across all sectors and all industries. But this B Corp that I mentioned, this is gaining more and more acceptance amongst companies of all sizes. So you have small single operator, SMEs, up to large corporations, and it's gaining a lot of traction. I think last time I read it was a few thousand companies already.
Yeah, from the numbers you suggested, it sounds like shareholder value is significantly increased, which ultimately drives a lot of the decision making at the corporate level, and clearly a lot of decision making at the investment side. So I think I recently read about Danone, the food manufacturer, which I think make yogurts and probably several other products. But ultimately, they changed their mission statement last week to become very much a wholesome organization that was sustainable, and so they're starting to make these decisions, and lots of companies are starting to follow suit, which is interesting. I think your particular one of your particular fields of interest is IoT. And I suppose one of my particular interests is electrification of cars. I often have this discussion about lithium batteries. So lithium is a very rare element. There's only a small amount. I think there's only 2 places in the world where it's mined in any great quantities, one in South America and one in Africa. At the moment, car batteries are not particularly recyclable. They're not designed to be recyclable. But this has to change. The energy costs and the transportation costs of mining lithium and put it in a battery, where you then buy something that's called an environmentally protecting vehicle. It opens up all sorts of questions. If you ultimately, I think what I'm maybe mulling in my head is the actual supply chain is as important as the end game. Yeah. So there's no point. You really have to not just be somebody that promotes sustainability from your organization, but you have to ensure that your supply chain goes right back into the roots of source material, and you have to ensure that all these different organizations are also supplying. Yeah? And ultimately, the market for these suppliers will be there if enough companies switch or demand that they follow suit. Yeah?
And this is a key element on the B Corp certification as well. Is you have to look at the whole supply chain, and actually the governance part of it takes in that it has to be in the ethos and mindset and whole ethos of the company to think about balance across social, environmental, and profit as well. So balancing purpose and profit to benefit people, planet, and for the B Corp also, you have to recertify every 2 years. So, it's to avoid, they try their very best to avoid any sort of SDG washing or whatever. And I mean, everything is a process. And for IoT, for me as well, a lot of people are very concerned if we have all these billions of devices and then the connectivity. But there's a lot of work going on to actually reduce the footprint and increase the handprint of all these devices, on the algorithms for the connectivity, on using less data intensive things. So it's a process. We're not there yet, but there are so many excellent companies, big and small, and so many startups. I think you know some of them as well, energy harvesting and things like this.
I follow a couple of companies, one in Wales and one in Norway, that are looking at IoT energy harvesting. And I find it very interesting to be able to extract energy from RF, signal in from mobile phones, from vibration, from heat. There was even a suggestion I read that you could actually extract it from rust, because that's a heat generating chemical reaction. Yeah. So there's all sorts of opportunities which could open up, which is kind of and the cost of ownership of IoT systems with battery changes, when you might have, let's just say, an organization like some kind of energy company might have millions of IoT devices, and then it might cost you $100 to actually send somebody there to change the battery every 3 years. This cost becomes enormous in terms of cost of ownership. Yeah. So I think that's a great example of where maybe the bottom line improves when you try to think about sustainable kind of solutions. Yeah?
It's really, one has to consider the whole life cycle and the circular economy, and there are a lot of things that come into it. And there's a lot of research going on making biodegradable sensors from cellulose and other materials. Energy harvesting, as you say, and ultra low power is, I mean, absolutely primordial for IoT. Otherwise, you can't start, because as you rightly said, you can't go out and change the batteries if you have all these. They have to live a lifetime without battery change.
Yeah, in fact, I've been speaking to one company who do IoT for industrial railway systems, and they seem to harvest the energy of the vibrations of the trains crossing the tracks, which create enough energy to store sufficient energy for the device to be able to transmit occasionally, which I guess ultimately that's the objective. So that's an interesting solution to the problem space. So I guess many of the people listening will be working or owners of small companies. So what kind of advice could you give, or what would you suggest a small company owner? I guess large companies, large corporations already have sustainability experts and departments. What would you suggest a startup does in terms of its positioning and its kind of ethos?
I love this question, Paul, because this is the decade of doing. We have less than 10 years to reach the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, so we all have to do our bit. So at the same time, it can be very overwhelming for an individual or a small company when you're thinking about everything else. So for me, I like the low-hanging fruit. So things that are within our scope of influence and within our skill set, and which can be implemented easily, quickly, and inexpensively. And also, I think it's important to pick something that gives us a buzz and gives us a sense of achievement when we've done it. Unfortunately, there are some really excellent tools available. And one of my favorite is from the UN, and it's called the Lazy Person's Guide to Saving the World. And it has 4 levels of activity, starting off from the sofa superstar to the exceptional employee.
I'll try to put the link to that document in the messaging on LinkedIn, so people can take a look at that.
Yeah, do. I'll send it to you. So it starts off with such basic things that any of us can do, such as turning off the lights, unplugging devices when you don't need them, using online banking, only buy from sustainable suppliers, donate what you don't need, eat less meat, particularly beef, because it's the worst for us, use refillable water and coffee cups, replace old light bulbs with more energy efficient ones, and recycle as much as can. And then, of course, we move on to higher up the guide, and like using water and energy efficient systems. Supporting equality is very important, whether that's equality of pay, of access to healthcare, or access to opportunities. Then, recognize our own and call out other people's unconscious biases and discrimination, particularly systemic. So these are all things that any of us can do in a small, as an individual or in a small company. And then the companies can take the B impact assessment, which is a short assessment which is tailored for the size of the company and the industry we're operating in. And it takes a couple of hours, and afterwards then we should have a good idea where we stand now and which interventions could have the most impact. And then they also provide the SDG Manager platform, which has really concrete modules tailored to each of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah.
And in Switzerland, where I live, we also have something called the Swiss Triple Impact Program. And that provides a platform to businesses of all sizes to access and to assess and measure our impact and facilitate better decision making. So I would say to conclude is start with what you're passionate about, what you can influence and achieve, and then grow from there. And there are lots of tools and platforms available to help us. And so it's up to us. We have less than 10 years. So if everybody does our little bit every day, we can achieve a lot.
Yeah, and I think that I think you're right in terms of let's say it's a bit like from the sofa to running a marathon, right?
Exactly.
It's a kind of very step-by-step process. You wouldn't step out the door and expect to run 26 miles, yeah? Or certainly I wouldn't anyway. Maybe.
Me neither.
Okay, that's fine. So, Brigid, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I've personally learned a lot about sustainability and some of the processes around it. I always ask one final question, which is always to tell me something that would surprise me or surprise the audience about yourself. So maybe you could comment.
I always hate these last questions, but I suppose one thing that people find a little bit surprising is that I like to juggle. I started doing it first just because I'm a desk person, and then from my shoulders. So, I like to do a little bit of juggling. Nothing too fancy, but
okay. So
it's
it's
not
good. Flames and knives. It's.
Well, I've once frightened my mom because my son has these rubber eggs, so I was juggling these.
Perfect. So let's. If you send me the link, I'll put it up on the message I send out with the video. And clearly, if somebody wants to contact Brigid, their contact details or a LinkedIn connection will be part of the message. So feel free to speak to Brigid or connect up with her. And if you want to discuss sustainability or her business side of IoT sensing, I'm sure she'd be delighted to hear from you and spark a conversation. So one final time, thank you again, Brigid. It's been an absolute treasure to speak to you again, and I hope we catch up soon.
Well, thank you, Paul, and likewise.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you, Brigid.